Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are dialing in from today. And thank you very much for attending our webinar today, which is a webinar in celebration of investing in our planet on today, which is World Earth Day, April 2022. My name is Nikki Manda. I'm Crown Agent's Director for Climate Change and Energy. And I'm very thankful to be here today chairing this webinar. It's a real pleasure to have a great lineup of speakers today, whom I'll introduce to you in a moment. But really just to give you a sense of why we are having the webinar today, we wanted to take this particular moment to reflect on the fact that despite the fact that we all work on some of the biggest threats facing our world today, we must really take a moment to celebrate the fact that there are many, many good people out there who every single day are doing truly amazing work on stopping and reversing the damage that we as a human species are doing to our planet. So our webinar today is really about sharing the quite amazing story of Freetown the Treetown Campaign, which has become somewhat of a beacon of innovation and success in the African context around nature-based solutions. And that's largely been as a result of the skilled, energetic and visionary leadership of the Honourable Mayor of Freetown, Yvonne Aka-Sawyer, and her team that she's assembled around her. Freetown the Treetown has played a really central role in demonstrating how nature-based solutions investments and create multiple benefits through transforming social and ecological systems. So that's really about transforming the relationship that people have with their natural world. And this has been a very important step in creating a sound foundation on which the national government in Sierra Leone has begun to bring nature-based solutions centrally into their climate change response strategy nationally, as a keystone approach. Through our Sierra Leone country office, Crown Agents has begun to work with the National Ministry of Environment on ways that we can help them accelerate investment into their nature-based solutions pathways. We really do feel that the rich learning that is emerging from Freetown the Treetown is quite central in shaping how we go forward with this work with the National Ministry. So today we have a really interesting lineup of speakers for you, starting off with Habiba Wuri, who is our Deputy Country Director of our Sierra Leone office, Crown Agents. And she'll be telling you very briefly a little bit more about the work that we are doing in Sierra Leone with the National Ministry of Environment and others to try and build resilience and sustainability in Sierra Leone. Our next speaker was to have been Mayor Yvonne Aka-Sawyer, but unfortunately she's been called away to an urgent engagement and is not able to attend today. In her place, and by no means less able in telling the Freetown the Treetown story, is Eric Hubbard, who is Technical Advisor to the Freetown the Treetown Campaign. And he'll be sharing the program journey as well as his insights on the key innovations and learning from the program, as well as how this can be useful in scaling the solutions emerging from the program regionally and nationally. Then we have Bala Amara Sakaran, who is the co-founder and the director of the Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary. Bala has been a stalwart champion and a driver of community reforestation in protected areas over many, many years in Sierra Leone. And he's going to tell you a little bit about his perspectives on and his experiences in this area. And last but certainly not least, we have Daniel Ronan from UAVAid, co-founder and director. UAVAid is an organization that focuses on drone technology, particularly in the humanitarian and medical logistics context. And Daniel is going to tell us a little bit about how we are beginning to use drone technology to help us in monitoring and evaluation for nature-based solutions projects particularly those in remote and hard to reach areas. So thanks again from my side for joining today. You'll notice from our agenda, if I can progress the slides, on the left there, that we haven't included a question and answer session in today's webinar. This is really a webinar focused on sharing with you. However, we anticipate that you may have questions. And so what we would like to suggest is that during the course of the webinar today, please do feel free to put your questions into the chat. What we will undertake to do is over the course of the next day or two, we'll compile a paper which essentially provides responses to your questions, and we'll be circulating that to you along with copies of the presentations. So please do pop your questions in the chat. And I'm going to hand over now to Habiba, who's going to tell you a little bit about our work in Sierra Leone. Thanks, Habiba.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Hi, everyone. As Nikki mentioned, I am Habiba Wuri. I'm the Deputy Country Director here in Sierra Leone for Crown Agents. I'm with, to my right, James Houghton, who is technically the brains behind this and honestly should be the one speaking here. He's been the brains behind most of our efforts within climate change, mitigation, and resilience and adaptation. So I am happy that we do have him here. In the event I forget any of the really important things I'm supposed to talk about. So I just wanted to give you a quick background of what we do as Crown Agents in Sierra Leone globally, but specifically in Sierra Leone and most recently as well. For those of you that are aware, this may not be news to you, but we are change makers. We believe ourselves to be change makers. And we believe that we do that by empowering governments and people of the most vulnerable states in the world. In Sierra Leone, we work on economic policy reform, change management, revenue administration, supply chain management and enhancement, and health system strengthening. And our work in Sierra Leone right now it's a mixed bag of efforts that we think would actually lead to the most sustainable change. So in the health sector, we are working on reducing child mortality. So there's a project we have called Child Champs, which is a child health and mortality prevention surveillance program. With that, we're able to determine what's actually causing under-5 deaths in Sierra Leone. And we hope with that, we'll be able to generate the data that the government will need to take action. And there's a data to action element that we will be implementing this year. There's the Saving Lives project as well that's funded by FCDO that we're the supply chain leads for. With that, we're providing direct support to the government through the National Medical Supplies Agency and the Ministry of Health as well. We have embedded TAs in the NMSA and in the Ministry of Health that support on various health systems matters from health financing to last mile delivery. We also have within the health space our IPAL project. We are the fiscal agents for CDC in the Ministry of Health's Integrated Health Projects Administration Unit. Essentially, that unit projects manages many donor-funded projects in Sierra Leone. And we provide direct support to the CDC, but also to the ministry. We have an embedded senior advisor based there. Outside of the health space, we have 1.5 projects, or what I like to call 1.5 projects. The half is our WHO certified pharma grade warehouse, where we provide support, obviously, on storage of medical supplies, but honestly, we also see it as a bridge for us and for Sierra Leone into international trade. So presently, we're actually storing pineapples because that is where we think, and that is where both what the market demands, but also where we think through our internal trade experts, we think that we can help Sierra Leone in the economic realm, economic growth realm. We also have our ITAS project, which recently concluded. With that, we were the project managers for the integrated tax administration system, the implementation of it. And we directly supported the National Revenue Authority along with the Ministry of Finance. It's being rolled out. So for those of you based in Sierra Leone, you have us to thank for being able to file your tax, or maybe to not thank, for being able to file your taxes properly. Our foray into climate change mitigation came about where it normally comes about, our interest in health system strengthening, governance system strengthening. We, as I mentioned before, are quite active in the health space, and obviously one of the biggest challenges in Sierra Leone is infrastructure, primarily electrification, with only 23% of Sierra Leone being technically electrified. that obviously has a huge impact on health outcomes within health facilities, both hospitals and PHUs. So we last year conducted an assessment of various health facilities in the various areas that we operate in Sierra Leone. And we were able to understand to an extent what the gaps are with electrification. But we realized that we couldn't stop there. Naturally, climate change is something that is not, unfortunately, going to go away within a year. And we understand that President Ladavio also has made his commitments for Sierra Leone to be more carbon neutral by 2030. So we understood that for us to continue to support the government, we need to continue to do it in the way we've been doing, which is being the connector for various parts of the government that don't necessarily speak, but that would like to have that conversation. So through James's efforts, we have been able to engage with the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Energy to see how we can take the conversation forward. We have obviously realized with the work that Eric and the team at FCC, along obviously led by Mayor Yvonne Aka-Sawyer, have been doing with FCC on the Freetown the Treetown Campaign, we had a solid bedrock that we could build off of. And Eric is obviously going to speak about it soon. And we thought with Daniel's role as director of UAVAid, we could probably shift the conversation around innovation. I think many people, when they think drones, they think fancy, they think sexy. That's not necessarily why we're using them. We think that they are actually useful. And we are trying to integrate tools like that are both practical and also kind of attractive into achieving general development outcomes. So I'll hand over to Eric to get the ball rolling. Thanks again for having me, and hope that we can have useful dialogue.
Well, thank you, Habiba, and thank you for having me, and hello to everyone, morning and afternoon. The Freetown the Treetown Campaign comes out of an understanding that the city of Freetown, and its interconnectedness into the western area of Sierra Leone has grown at a pace in the context of its urbanization that we are that the natural ecosystems are under threat, and that threat, coupled with the exacerbation of climate change, creates massive risk for the 1.5 million residents of the city, and for sort of the economic, political, social dynamics of the city itself. So when the mayor came into office, the key component was around how do we understand where we sit as a city against the climate crisis. So we needed to do a lot of work to understand those dynamics and to ensure that we as a city could be on a pathway to climate resilience. And in doing that, we sort of went through a number of technical processes to understand where we sit. And so within that context, we see some of the climate drivers that are here, where we have a tree cover loss of roughly 12%. It's 55% per year. So from 2011 to 2018, we've been losing roughly 550,000 trees a year. And what we understand from the period of 2018 to where we are now, that number has accelerated. And the major forest reserve that is all around Freetown and now has become a part of Freetown because of the urbanization and the encroachment into the western area peninsula forest and the reserve, we've been losing millions more trees within that period. And so what does that do? It has a direct impact on the city within the context of the way we think about it, sort of the climate risks that have been created as a result of it. And those risks are varied. It looks at, sort of the level of deforestation has led to extreme landslide risk, flood risk, coastal erosion, sea level rise, extreme heat, yeah, and it is threatening our water supply. At the same time, we look at a context of growing emissions, and we understand that the issue around mitigation of growing emissions is important, right? But at the same time, we need to be looking at sort of the change sort of in the climate dynamics that have created this risk that sits upon us. We have to create the governance and the financial and the social dynamics to adapt. And so within the context of understanding these numbers that we have here, the rise in carbon emissions, it comes from a sort of an inventory that we've done to look at greenhouse gas emissions as they affect directly the city, and then looks at the context around sort of how this lays out in terms of energy, in terms of transport and waste, and looking at the increases within those contexts, and the level of emissions in the city and how they are rising systematically, and then thinking about what we can do sort of within the context of green and blue carbon dynamics to mitigate. At the same time, adapting to and protecting from the risks of floods and landslides in particular that are happening. So there are many things that a city, and our city in particular, has to grapple with right now. And so in doing so, we have begun and will launch this year a climate action plan that lays out the dynamics for how that should be done. But within the Transform Freetown agenda, which is our development plan for the city, the mayor's vision around sort of environmental management, there was a goal that was set to reduce or to increase tree cover by 50%, tree and vegetation cover by as of 2018 levels, sort of over a period sort of through 2022. And from that came the Freetown the Treetown initiative to plant and grow 1 million trees. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to go through these fairly quickly, but this shows that it was important for us to actually understand sort of the impact sort of the climate drivers on the city. So we've looked very specifically at the flood risk, and we've looked at that flood risk over time. And we can also see that within the context of where we were between 1982 and 2012, sort of, and where we are now, sort of the conditions for increased flooding are growing. And so if we're going to adapt to this, we need to create a dynamic to do so. Hence the idea of increasing tree cover and targeting it quite specifically in the locations where the risk exists. Let's quickly go through the next slide. So that is what the flooding risk looks like. This is the landslide risk, and we all know about the severe landslide that happened in 2017, which changed all of the dynamics and got global attention. The problem is that we have landslides, from that period and before that period, small scale landslides that are happening every single year. And the pace of the deforestation and the destabilization of the slopes in the kind of sort of high topography that we have in Freetown has made it the whole space, the hillside where all of the urbanization is happening, susceptible to more of these types of landslides, which makes it more critical for us to look at how we understand sort of what the geomorphic dynamics are as a result of sort of the urbanization in those spaces, and plant trees, and plant them strategically in such a way to stabilize slopes, which we can do. The next one. We also look at sea level rise and coastal erosion, and we also look specifically at heat stress. sort of the heat stress dynamics are critical. Yeah, the rising temperature. The biggest thing that many things, but one of the major significant things that came out of COP26 is the imagining of living in a 2-degree world, right? It is absolutely impossible, for our city of Freetown and cities across Sierra Leone to exist in those kinds of temperatures. It will affect every kind of dynamic, and particularly the biophysical dynamics of people trying to do the everyday. And so we need to be thinking about strategies that will allow us to cool our spaces in order to preserve our city and our ability to live in it. So let's go to the next slide. So when we look at risk, and those risks in particular, we've come up with a formula. So we look at climate change times hazard times vulnerability. And vulnerability is critical because in our city, in terms of the spaces, there are 36% of the settlement spaces in Freetown are informal, auto-constructed. And 60% of the people live across those spaces. And then we look at that overcapacity and increase the city's capacity, to manage these hazards and reduce the vulnerability. We can become more climate resilient. And so this is our frame, for how we have structured processes to move toward climate adaptation, and how we have thought about and grown out and co-designed with communities the Freetown the Treetown Campaign. We can go to the next. So the goal, which is in the development plan, in the the Transform Freetown plan, to increase tree and vegetation cover by 50% of 2018 levels. Now, that's what we intend to do. 1 million trees does not get us that number, but the 1 million trees gets us started in a bold, ambitious way. And so the view then was, let's enter with something that is bold and ambitious and try to do it over 2 to 3 years to create the critical mass within communities, and then also with partners, and particularly within the private sector, to be able to move to a context where we can get sustainable green growth, focusing on green infrastructure, but then also linking that back to green jobs and a green economy effect. Okay, I'll go to the next one. So the view then was our approach to invest in green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, to build a green economy, which means creating green jobs, and creating green jobs that create an alternative to the types of livelihoods that are currently degrading the natural ecosystems. So we want to create a dynamic that moves people away, an alternative to deforestation, and incentivize community stewardship, ownership, innovation, and climate action and adaptation, and finally build a tree impact investment strategy through carbon offsets to corporate and institutional partners to sustainably fund the reforestation. Go to the next one. So we've set some milestones, sort of short-term and long-term, where we're looking at an increase in the tree and vegetation cover by 1 million. We need to plant those 1 million trees. And here's the thing, rarely do we say plant without grow, because for every tree planted, you have to invest in the growing of that tree. We've already talked about the fact that we've lost 500 and we're losing 550,000 trees per year. So what we're trying to do is stop those losses, but also then begin to replenish and have the same people who were involved in the process of creating the losses now incentivized to plant and to grow. The context around the growth is important. You have to invest 2 times as much in the growing as you do in the planting. And what has happened is we've planted, and we go back and the trees are gone. They're just not there. If we are to create the change that is required in urban and rural spaces that are under threat, we need to make sure that we have to not only place green infrastructure in strategic locations, but we have to be able to grow it and maintain it over time. Grow the trees to establishment, ensure that they are there. Okay, and so we're looking at your sort of increasing economic livelihoods, and we're specifically looking at 1,000 plus jobs. We have already met that target. Within the context of the planting and growing that has happened between 2020 and to date, we have created more than 1,000 jobs, green jobs, yeah, where people are getting meaningful resources from the work that they do. And the work that they're doing is that they are, rebuilding, restoring urban ecosystems. We are looking at developing reliable, replicable methods, right? And using digital technology as a core driver to help us do this. And then we are specifically looking at targets to decrease flood risk and landslide susceptibility. We are targeting our planting and growing in specific areas. So that means that we had to understand a number of things. So a natural capital assessment is required. An understanding of the geomorphology of the entire peninsula area, so that we understand slope dynamics. Yeah, so that within the context of those dynamics, we can see those that are the most unstable, so that the planting should be happening in those areas. And we work with communities to understand it. So and then we use the geospatial and drone technology to help us to understand the change that has happened over time in those spaces and what's actually there, where we can plant and where we can't, where communities are, where there are more spaces. We look at a particular dynamic there, we build out a specific planting and growing plan against the goals that are set, within the context of where the need is. And in doing that work, also, which is work that has to be funded, is critical for us to be able to plant and grow in a sustainable way. So it's looking at local knowledge and understanding the dynamics through engaging people on the ground, but also doing the science, right? And then building technology overlay on top of that gives us a picture of the problem and a solution that is curated to those specific areas and engaging communities in doing the work. Okay, so within our long term, quickly, that means that we are looking at restoring at least 3,000 hectares of urban land. We're looking at sequestering, we use 76,000 because, we just want to be conservative. So we're looking at sequestering somewhere around 100,000 tons of CO2. And then we are also very seriously looking at the reduction of heat stress. And so then that, you will see that our strategy, in the first phase was around was specifically around the areas of flood risk and landslide susceptibility, and then looking specifically at the watershed, and then also moving toward street trees and open areas to create more greening in those spaces to accommodate the context around heat stress. Okay, we can go to the next one, and I'll speed up a bit. Yeah. Okay. So I think I've actually just laid out the key objectives, so we can keep going. You can keep going. Okay, so the context for the management of this space is that let's stop there. So within the context of the Freetown the Treetown Campaign, What we've done in 20 and 21, we look very specifically at tree survival, and tree survival is the critical piece here. So we plant and we grow trees. So between 2020, we planted 250,000 trees. In 2021, we planted an additional 300,000 plus. And if you look at the context, we have a very substantial level of survival of those trees because the trees are paired to a tree grower. So let's go to the next one. Within the context of that dynamic, we have, through a co-design process with communities, we have built a network of tree growers that work through community-based organizations, of which there are 11. They are divided across the 13 catchment areas that make up the western area, so Freetown and the neighboring rural district together, because our water sits in their space. So as local authorities, we had to come together and partner in order to figure out how we would solve the problem. So if we're planting 1 million trees, it's across the western area. And so the key to this is every tree that is planted is tracked. Every tree that is planted and tracked is verified. If that tree is verified, and we have a team of data techs that sit inside of the project that are verifying all of the trees that come into the system. The tree growers all have a tree tracking app on their phones. And for every tree that they plant, they must track that tree. They track the tree, they upload the tree to the system, the tree is verified, then they will get a micropayment. And then from each tree that is verified, then what we do is we tokenize those trees. Those trees that are now in our system become currency. It becomes currency that we can then trade to corporations and institutions for carbon credits under a social corporate responsibility dynamic at about $6 US per token. This creates the context for all of the trees that have been verified and then tokenized. We can move them into the market and get resources from those who are looking, who have made net zero pledges. That was our first target. And so there are a number of corporations that we've been talking to that already have net zero plans. And within the context of that, they can get offsets from supporting our trees. They become impact owners in this process. And so we have created a process that will allow them to be able to see the impact and the growth. Let's go to the next slide. So within the context of that, we've built a platform that links together the tree growers, and the impact investors. So we have a tree tracking piece where the grower does the tracking of the planting and the tracking of the tree. We have a team, within this overall ecosystem that verifies, sort of all of this, and it's inside of a platform that is visible to the world and specifically to investors and to the city to be able to track progress. And then once we actually go through the process of tokenization, we're working with a third-party fund manager that manages those resources. So first we have our tokens that are inside of the system, but then there's an exchange, tokens for money. And then those resources go back into the growing so that we're able to sustainably fund the growing exercise that needs to happen over a sustained period. We have basically 3 overlapping periods of 3 to 5 years, starting in 2020. And this basically takes us into 2030. So all of the trees out of this process should have grown to establishment within the context of the period at which we should be reporting sort of against mitigation and adaptation targets. And so the context here is this is not an overnight process. It's a long-term process. It's a process that requires a level of investment in the ecosystem and in communities that will change the dynamic between the way in which people behave in those spaces, and allow us to be able to plant, grow, sustain, and protect trees that are planted in the space. Let's look at the last slide here, last couple, and then I'll stop. But this one is the digital flow. This shows the technical data flow of the process. So the data that comes into our platform, where we have this data layer, comes in from all of the tree growers. It goes into a system, we verify it. Once the trees are verified, we've set up to make payments to the growers. Those growers are paid every 2 months, and they're paid basically about 1.2 million leones, so about $120. This is over a 3-year period. This is in excess of 20 million leones that they can access over that period. This is a context that changes behavior. And we have seen the context of linked to those resources. The maintenance is the critical piece. The idea of planting and planting for planting's sake does not work. It's trumped sort of by all of the livelihood dynamics that are degrading. So we needed to sort of change the dynamic to create sort of a value, to create value and investment that changes behavior sustainably. And we believe that we have done this. And so what this shows is once we get all of that data from the grower into the system, we can then convert that into the financial piece. So we then have tokens that we can trade. And so the context for doing so is that we have an impact investment focus. Heineken, for instance, is sort of have decided that they're going to decarbonize by 2040. All of their supply chains. One of their major supply chains comes into Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone brewers, Heineken is the majority stakeholder. And so we're looking at breweries, we're looking at banks, we're looking at GSM companies, we're looking at international NGOs, and all of them are at this moment sort of looking at how they would actually invest in this process. And I guess the final slide would be our impact piece, and then I can stop. So what we're looking at in terms of our overall impact is that there are a number of SDGs that we will meet as a result of this work. And the key pieces here you can see we have a very specific target sort of around sort of how we're going to get to resilience. And we've been able to build out a set of indicators and a monitoring framework that links back to the SDGs that says, if we do these 1 million trees over this particular period and are able to invest these kinds of resources back into communities, we can get this kind of result. Thank you very much. And I'll hand it over to Bala.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. I think I don't have to be so technical because I work with very poor rural communities. They won't even understand if we try to go too technical. Now, as Eric clearly said, that the situation, not just in Freetown, right across Sierra Leone, is dire, it's in peril, the environment is at risk, to be honest. And so for us at Tacugama, every day is Earth Day, basically. It's been tough few years, I would say. The kind of carnage going on across the country is unimaginable. But it'll be worse if some of us don't come in the front line and try to find solutions. So coming to Tacugama's role in terms of how we are addressing or mitigating this with community level, first we need to give you a background of what is Tacugama. Tacugama was basically founded to take care of rescued and orphaned chimpanzees, but with time we realized that we cannot be sitting there receiving chimps. We really need to look at the root causes and what is causing all these problems. And we started addressing the issue of saving chimpanzees, basically wild chimpanzees and their habitats. And when you talk about saving habitats, obviously you have to get into all the other aspects to it. That is the reforestation is a main component. And this is how we came into this talk, especially with the Crown agents and also the UAVAid Limited, to see how we can bring in some new and innovative way of elements into reforestation, ecosystem restoration, and to see how we can address this climate mitigation in a better way. The current system is unable to offset what is going on. I mean, between the government of Sierra Leone, and if you take the Crown agents through their help, and also Freetown City Council, organizations like Tacugama doing their bit, but the amount of logs that are coming down, the amount of loss is a lot more than what we are all trying to plant. So this is the most difficult scenario we all are faced with. But as I said, it'll be worse. At least all of us are trying in our own way. Tacugama, our role model, has been basically not concentrating so much in Freetown, as there are bigger players in Freetown. I think we are concentrating more in the provinces. We work across Sierra Leone. At the moment, we work in 4 districts, working with about 100 communities and trying to address most of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals in our own small way. At the moment, as I said, 100 communities mainly providing livelihood support, and in return to protect all what they have around them, whether it is community forest or whether they are buffer zones to national parks. We have a proven experience in influencing policy also at the highest level, because 2 years ago, I think, for us to celebrate that after 27 years of work, we managed to convince the government to declare the chimpanzee as the national animal of Sierra Leone. And this is the one and only country that has done it. And for us, chimpanzee is just a tool to see how we can use the chimpanzee to protect our environment. And that is something we've been working on. And this is something we continue to work with all the communities we work in. We also, 7-8 years ago, very instrumental in getting the government to declare the Western Area Forest Reserve into a national park, so that we could create better laws and probably get better protection. But unfortunately, with all the urbanization and the problems we are facing, to be honest, that we haven't really succeeded. It is on paper, we declared it as a national park, but government hasn't got the political will to take it to the other level to actually to protect this national park. And it was declared as a national park not because of chimpanzees, it's mainly because of the water resources, because Freetown totally depend on our on the Freetown Peninsula. There are 3 or 4 dams currently being used by the country, but there are potential to expand that into 15, 16. And the way the population is growing, and that is the only way Freetown could continue to remain in its current place. We have in the provinces, basically, as I said, we work with 100 communities. What we have done is we are recruited and trained close to 70 biomonitors across the country. These are community guards. Basically, they are trained, equipped, and made to use smart technology and to collect data, so that we do it in a more scientific way. So that, because Tacugama's vision is also to whatever we do, it has to be research-based, so that we'll be able to prove to people what has been done is actually working. So that has been the case. So we have 22 guards in community guards in Loma Mountains, 10 in Bagrua axis in Moyamba, 4 in Pujan, 9 in Western Area, and 16 in Otamba Kilimi National Park. One of the other projects we did 2 years ago is a corridor project in Bagrua Chiefdom. What we did was, when we did the national survey of wild chimpanzees, we came across this patch of forest in Moyamba district where this is kind of fragmented forest space due to anthropogenic activities. But we realized that if we create a definite corridor, there is a possibility to reduce the wildlife-human conflict in that area. If you take the Moyamba district, it's an area people would hardly believe you have over 300-400 wild chimpanzees are still roaming around in that landscape. But then every single chimpanzee, the moment the IUCN declared the Western chimpanzee as the most threatened and endangered species, every chimpanzee means something. So for us, it's not a matter of only working in forest areas, because the chimpanzees have evolved or learned to live in habitat, not just in forested areas. They are more than happy and adapted to live in fragmented community forest, and they've learned to live there. And so we need to find what is going on, what are the dynamics and drivers behind their existence in such a land space interacting with humans. And so we have a responsibility how we can protect them, at the same time reduce human-wildlife conflict, and also to see by doing it how we can reduce other risks. Because as we know, we're living in an era there is a lot of zoonotic diseases being spread. And if you actually try your best to separate the two, the wild spaces for wildlife and also humans not to interfere in these places, we are also reducing such a risk. And in Loma Mountain, I think people from the outside don't realize Loma Mountain is a very, very important landscape in the whole of West Africa. Recently, like 1 year, 6 months ago, we did a complete survey of the national park, and we realized that Loma holds the highest concentration of wild chimpanzees anywhere across West Africa and Central Africa. And such a place needs to be protected by EDCOS. It's like the jewel on the crown for this country. And I think all conservationists need to put attention. But with lack of funding, Tacugama has to do it by themselves, and trying to complement some of the efforts the National Protected Area Authority is trying to put. So at the moment, 2 years ago, with US Fish and Wildlife funding, we managed to plant between 20 to 30,000 trees. And the last 2 years, with funding from Touring Foundation from Netherlands, we planted 45,000 trees. And this year, we want to plant another 60,000 trees in that landscape. How we are doing it is basically engaging communities. As I said, some of these biomonitors are coming from there. We are forming groups, and we are forming community nurseries. These are done throughout the year, and the rainy season, it's like a celebration. Every community goes and plants something on the buffer zones of Loma. So through this, every community is planting somewhere close to 3,000 to 4,000 trees every year. And you multiply that by the 21 communities we are working, so that quickly comes up to 70,000, 80,000 trees. And this is something we don't want to do it on just by project. We are trying to do, our model is not totally depending on funding. It is also trying to see how we can use the community to understand their problems, to understand the importance of protecting their immediate environment, and especially when it comes to their water sources. And the other thing is we are always looking for partnerships. So because of that, sometimes because we are not a livelihood organization, we provide conservation solutions and we protect chimpanzees, but then you cannot practice these things without doing something to the communities. So this is where we need to form partnerships, but you got to be careful in terms of how do you form them. Recently, we have a very strong partner within the country, the World Hope International. Their footprint is basically giving boreholes and providing water for these rural communities. What we have bargained, and we managed to get an MOU with them. In our case, all our 21 communities in Loma will actually receive the water from the forest rather than a borehole in the village. Because the idea is to make that connection, make the people understand that this water is coming from the Loma Mountains, and the water is there simply because the trees are standing. So this connection, I think, will help them to understand. And soon after we have done that, the communities have passed a bylaw in those areas to make sure there's no tree coming down in that area. So this is a project we have just started, and hopefully it will give dividends in the recent future. To touch on successes, I think not just about planting new trees, it's also protecting the existing trees. Because this is the problem we are facing all across the country. I mean, as much as some of us are doing our best, but you can see the amount of carnage that has gone on recently. I mean, even recently, we've been tasked with European Union funding to do technical support, to give technical support and do livelihood activities around the Tambakilimi National Park. But then the park itself is undergoing a lot of threat. There is one particular monocropping going on, the rosewood. There's so much demand from Far East, and all that is being carted away. So we can all come together and do our best, but government needs to have the political will to back us. Otherwise, it'll be all failed projects. So this is the major thing. And we see recently there is a notification from IUCN and from CITES regarding the banning, or at least asking all West African nations to ban the rosewood trade. We hope this will result in some clear policy from the government to stop this. On other level, I mean, you cannot be just doing these things only with that. You need to also invest time in educating the people. So Tacugama also focuses a lot in terms of having education programs, forming nature clubs, and we also work with the flagship program of Jane Goodall Institute. That's a Roots and Shoots program. So these are being practiced across all our communities we work in. And last year we had one milestone, that is basically working with the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education to include our environmental education curriculum into the national curriculum. So this is a big success for us, because as a small organization, we were able to do this. And at the moment, even at a primary school level, people are learning about Tacugama's efforts and about our national animal, the chimpanzee, and the need to protect and also to create that pride and to make the kids feel it's part of their heritage. I mean, law enforcement alone is not going to work. I think we need to go something more than that. People really need to understand this is ours. We need to protect our future depends on this. So, and especially with a country with a kind of commitment we've had, and also they're very thin on the ground in terms of law enforcement. So I think it has to be the seed needs to be planted with our younger generation right from the beginning, and that is something we've been doing. And with the community involvement is in every stage. We teach them how to collect the seeds, what time to collect the seeds, what type, what the choice of species, because we don't plant anything that is not indigenous. We focus on planting anything that is from that particular area. So if it is Loma Mountain, throughout the year, we get the communities to engage in collecting seeds and seedlings and have community nurseries. And when the rain starts next month, we start doing the planting assignment. Given Tacugama's involvement in protected and non-protected areas, and as the widespread buying in shown by the government, I think it's a matter of scaling it. So that is why we are extending arms to welcome other organizations, like whether it is Crown agents or UAVAid, to see how we can replicate some of the successes we had at a smaller level, because we are well positioned to do something bigger, especially with our involvement with Otombakilimi National Park and the Loma Mountain National Park. We are currently working with Ministry of Environment, with Crown agents and UAVAid to see how we can plant 1 million trees in the next 1 or 2 years between these two parks. It is so important for us as Tacugama is not just planting the trees. Between these two parks hold half the population of the wild chimpanzee population for Sierra Leone. And we cannot stand by and look at this to get destroyed. So as an organization fighting for chimpanzee conservation, I think for us it's a double win if we can help the communities to protect their forest and plant more trees, and also to protect chimpanzees at the same time. We are also looking at some of the other initiatives, like we are also trying to develop Sierra Leone's first ecotourism circuit, because some of these communities, you cannot encourage them to plant trees or go into agricultural activities, because they already have a beautiful forest and they have protected it through their own bylaws over the years. But how to strengthen them, because the poverty is everywhere. So we have chosen 3 or 4 communities this year that we basically want to create value for what they have protected. So I think through ecotourism, I think we'll be able to achieve that, at least to make a difference for these people. But we have also started working with them in terms of building their buffer zones, trying to plant that seed in their head to make them understand that the more trees they plant, the more beautiful their forest is. I think we'll be able to expand more into our ecotourism activities. So these are some of the areas we are looking at, and as I said, we are supposed to be looking after chimpanzees, but I think there's a lot more to do. I think we all need to step in. It is not, protecting our environment and celebrating Earth Day should not be left with a few people like us. I think everybody needs to get in. That's our message. And well, I cannot say Happy Earth Day. It's a sad Earth Day for everybody, but I think we can probably collaborate and form right partnerships, and we can do something more. Thank you, everyone.
Bala, thank you very much, and a welcome to our attendees. My name is Daniel Ronan. I'm the co-founder and director of UAVAid Limited. We are drone specialists focusing on UAV unmanned aerial vehicle applications in the humanitarian and development sphere. Now, over the next 5 minutes, because I am aware we're tight of time, over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a super express tour of why this frontier technology, and how it has the opportunity to facilitate reforestation at mass. So, Nikki, next slide, please. Okay, so the first question is, what are drones? The term is bandied about an awful lot. Fundamentally, drones are aircraft, any aircraft that hasn't got a human pilot on board. And what that means is that they come in lots of different flavors and types. They could be autonomous or manually controlled. They could be fixed wing, rotary, multiple copter, hybrid, and they are consumer drones available, which we can see from various toy stores, going all the way up to industrial. So there's a huge amount of variety in shape, speed, capability, design. So the key question is, why are they useful? And it essentially comes down to the fact that drones are able to provide reach and access to areas free from the restrictions of ground terrain. So by carrying different payloads to different areas which would otherwise be difficult to get to because of washed away roads, lack of ground infrastructure, terrain, mountain, hills, whatever it happens to be, drones are able to fly over these restrictions to access those parts and those areas. But one of the key questions which I talk about quite a lot is, why now? And fundamentally, it's because of advances in technology in 3 key areas. The first one is the fact that drones have developed in technology to provide greater range. So they're able to boost that access and reach element. Linked with that is something we call technically BVLOS flight, or beyond visual line of sight. What that means is that you're able to have the pilot somewhere remote from the drone and they don't need to see it. And because communications technology has improved, and alongside that, the regulations to allow it, it means we're able to take longer, further flights to access these areas. And then the third one is obviously the improved payloads. We can put different things on there, and they've been getting far better. Thank you. So what can drones do to support reforestation? Well, fundamentally, you're looking at 3 areas. The first 2 rely on sensors. You can stick lots of sensors on drones, be they mapping for photographic mapping, 3D mapping, GIS integration, or something we call NDVI, so we can monitor vegetation growth rates by sticking multispectral cameras on drones, and they can measure the wavelength of light coming off vegetation. We can then use live video to help support policing and monitoring in real time. And the third element, which is gaining interest in key applications, is something called which we call remote direct seeding, where you fly a drone and directly shoot seeds into the ground. Now, the last one, it looks very attractive intuitively, but unfortunately at the moment they seem to have a very high failure rate for seed growth of up to about 80%. And as Eric was speaking about the necessity to invest in livelihoods in local communities, using drones to remove seeds tends to go and work against that. So they're very suitable for certain applications, but where we're looking at applications in areas such as Sierra Leone, where there's such a strong need for local community engagement and building livelihood, capacity, probably not the best approach. And Mohan et al. Wrote a very good paper, which is referenced on the bottom if anyone is interested in the direct seeding. Nikki, next slide, please. Okay, so for Sierra Leone specifically, what are the opportunities to use drones for improving and accelerating reforestation? Well, what we would do is we would use drones, or what we will be doing is using drones to generate high resolution maps so that we can plan better what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, and how we're going to do it. We can use these high resolution maps to identify areas for reforestation and the intervention type. And we can use this type of technology, which has certain advantages over ground truthing because of speed, time, and the ability to update the data frequently, and overcome some of the historic limitations of satellite imagery, which suffers from problems to do with resolution and cloud cover and frequency of image updating. Drones are useful for supporting implementation because we can use them to validate and verify activity, and linking the data along with artificial intelligence and machine learning. We can then tree tag and then pull all of that data together into significant databases, which will therefore allow us to support the tokenization that Eric spoke about earlier, because you've got an additional layer of verification, and that provides greater validation for those that are wanting to monetize this. And therefore you start to build a much more resilient and robust circular economy where the verification is able to be viewed globally on online portals. So that last element of monitoring and evaluation, it means that we can use drones to continually update the data, reducing risk, verifying status, and in parallel with that, monitoring the canopy status and the activity, so you can actually scale up faster at lower risk, and have the situation and the current status of these reforested areas updated and viewable from anywhere in the world. So what drones are doing is they're providing a link for overcoming certain hesitancies in this space, as an opportunity to increase the scale and speed of reforestation, both of historic and recently degraded ecological systems and areas. So that's the quick 5-minute tour de force of drones in reforestation. I'm now going to hand you back to Nikki.
Great. Well, thanks to all the speakers for their very inspiring talks that they've given today. And thanks to all of you for joining the call and for staying on for the extra few minutes at the end. That was a little bit unplanned, but obviously very worth listening to from Daniel's talk perspective. So as I promised at the beginning, if you put questions in the chat, we will undertake to prepare a paper and circulate that to all of you over the coming days, along with a copy of the presentations that have been given. So once again, thanks very much for attending, and please continue to do all the things that you're able to do in your own personal capacity to continue to invest in our planet. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful weekend ahead.
Thanks a lot.